Hi everyone. Thought I'd have an assistant help me this week with their video. This is my dog Rosie. She's a little bit concerned at the moment because the weather's starting to turn here in Coffs as I'm making this, and she's not a fan of storms. But she's got her sheep with her. So we're getting near the end. It's a bit crazy to think, but so I thought I'd get this video out a little bit early because I'm going to talk about some hints and tips to help you with the major essay as well. Continuing on from the Collaborate session, so I'd encourage you to have a look at that if you haven't already. But firstly, this week coming is week 10, so we're getting towards the very end of the teaching period. This week's topic is we're looking at political violence and the impacts that can have on political systems and how violence is different. I might put her down shortly. She thinks she's a lapdog. Anyway, how violence can be undertaken differently and responded to differently in different political systems. So for example, here in Australia, as a liberal democracy, we tolerate certain degrees of political upheaval, political violence. I mean, we don't have violence as such. We have public demonstrations. We're allowed to have those things, which occasionally do descend into a bit of unruly events, but it's not compared to what we see in other states around the world. I mean, probably the most profound example, you want to hop down? That's better. You take your sheep. One of the most profound examples, of course, is 1989, the Tiananmen Square massacre in China. That's probably the one that sticks most in the West, but there have been many other examples around the world over different times. I mean, of course, we had the violence that took place as part of the Arab Spring. There's violence that routinely takes place in the United States in the last few months regarding the different sides of certain ideological viewpoints. So this violence and political disagreements around the world takes place constantly and regularly and on different scales in terms of how people respect one another. So it's an interesting topic to actually look at and see how people might equate the idea of violence with presenting a point. I always say some of the best discussions that I have, and I was very fortunate when I was an undergraduate student to have been fostered in a classroom environment by a sociology teacher who encouraged spirited debates. And I've always said some of the best debates that I've ever had are ones where you're in a room and you're passionate and you vehemently disagree with what's being said, and you've got raised voices and you're making an argument, you're countering arguments, and then you walk out of the room and you go, geez, that was amazing. I feel alive. I feel so intellectually stimulated and rejuvenated. I completely disagree with what that person said, but I love the fact that we engage in a spirited debate about the topic. That's what I would hope to encourage you to all take that same approach. And we don't want people to agree with each other, but we also don't want to resort to caveman type situations, which is, if I don't agree with you, I'm going to beat you up. That's not a sign of an advanced society, but unfortunately that's the way we seem to be regressing. So it's just something to think about in terms of how we can make a point get across. Is the lack of a point being presented due to frustration on either the part of the person making the point or the part of the receiver? There's a whole lot of things to consider. All right, so have some fun. I suspect this week will probably be a fairly quiet week because most of you will probably be drained after the major essay, but please do have a go with sharing some viewpoints about this week's topic. Now, with the major essay, a couple of quick points. Don't forget that it's due on Monday at 5 p.m. Monday let me just check the date here, looking down, the 18th. So it's two sides of the coin. In a way, it's bad that it's due a bit early, but in a way it's good because it means that you've then got your major piece of assessment out of the way before the end of the teaching period. So the last couple of weeks can be a bit less stressful for you, but also it gives you a bit more time to focus on your other units perhaps, because you don't have this one big piece hanging over your head for dictators and democrats. So with your essay, a couple of points I'd like to make to you. It is a long essay, it's 3,000 words. What tends to happen with these long essays is that people in the second half tend to lose focus, and it starts to just being a whole bunch of words put on paper to meet the word count. So be conscious of that. plan your paper, make sure it's structured well, so that if you, always say, if you take the time at the outset to plan your paper properly, then the writing part will become much easier, and it then won't either miss your word count, you won't go off topic, and you'll have a nice structure to what you're actually presenting. The next point is one I can't stress enough. Please make sure you answer the question that's being asked of you. This is a very common mistake, and I think it has the potential to be even more common with these questions that are, or these statements that are posed as part of the assessment task, because it leads you to perhaps go off topic. And I'll pick out an example here, the question on terrorism, which is looking at why sort of religious and ethnic issues tend to create conflict in democratic situations and less so in authoritarian situations. Now, it's a statement, so you can either agree or disagree with it, but if I'd use that one as an example, I'm not picking off any particular reason, but I suspect that question is probably going to get a fair bit of attention from a lot of you. Don't fall into the habit or the trap of giving me a huge big expose with the history of 9/11, because that's not what the question is actually asking you. It's certainly okay to use 9/11 and other types of situations as examples or case studies, but the question is actually asking you about why authoritarian, or does authoritarian rule sort of reduce conflict on the basis of ethnicity and religious issues. So, you know, be conscious of that. So just, yeah, don't get too off topic with things. Make sure you're actually answering the question that's being asked of you. Again, take the time to really read your question, underline key points. What are the key words that are being asked of you? And a way to approach answering these types of questions is forget about writing stuff down initially. Just look at the question on the paper and imagine that we're having a face-to-face discussion. All right, so you know, imagine a face-to-face discussion and you're asking a question and you're saying, I believe that you know, religious extremism accounts for terrorism. I then say to you, why do you think that? And you might then say, well, because of this example and this example and this example. That's your essay. Okay, so the because becomes the key part of your essay. So when I often say to people, don't overthink things, this is exactly what I mean. It's very easy to get caught up in the academia of writing stuff down. Have a discussion with yourself at the outset. Ask yourself, well, what do I actually think about these things? Come up with a couple of dot points. And that's the basis of your paper, because it becomes a lot easier to answer the question if you know what you're writing about. So this is what I always keep saying. And certainly in papers, it becomes very obvious when someone doesn't really know what they're talking about and is trying to write a whole bunch of paragraphs based on things that they've read, hoping it hits the mark. Okay, so be very clear in what you're arguing, in what you're writing. Make sure that it's answering the question. Ask yourself, why do I believe certain things, or why do I disagree with certain things? Put those dot points down and turn those into paragraphs. That's a nice way of approaching your paper. A couple of quick things as well. Do use a wide variety of resources. You know, with the first essay, some people fell into, again, it's a trap, of using a minimal amount of sources. And what I always say again is, if you only use a minimal amount, your work then becomes a summary of those sources. Okay, because so then the question then becomes, well, why am I reading your work? Why would I not just go and read Smith or Jones? Because you've taken most of the research from them, so why would I not just go and read their text? So a breadth of material adds a lot of support to your argument. And you think about, for example, if in the general political discussion, if I say, well, there is a single paper that says this, even though 900 papers say something else. So again, if you only use that one paper without researching widely, you could actually be incorrect. What if that one paper is wrong? If you use a couple of others, you might then say, well, the papers disagree with each other. Why they disagree? What do I think about their disagreement? This forms the basis of a better argument. So do make sure you do that. What else can I tell you? Please try to really avoid using Britannia. Now, Wikipedia years ago used to be the bad source that everyone used to always use, And I think we've managed to sufficiently beat that out of you now, which is good. So it's very rare for me to see someone use Wikipedia. So please don't use Wikipedia. Or similar type sites like answers.com, info site, all those kinds of things. But one that is creeping in increasingly is Britannia. Now, it's not as bad as Wikipedia, but as I always say to people, Britannia is fine if you're in junior high school, but we're at university. So let's aim for better quality sources. Same as history.com too. I mean, history.com is a fantastic website. It's great for general reading. If you're not sure about a certain topic, go and check it out. Great background stuff. But again, this is university. This is high level university. This is third year subjects. Let's aim for better quality sources to make a much more stronger argument. So please try to avoid generic sites like Britannia and history.com, those kinds of things. Proofread your work, because there's really a couple of stages in essay writing. The first stage is making your argument. In fact, it's the hardest stage, constructing your argument, putting on paper that you know what you're talking about. Once you've got that mastered, the next part then becomes, well, how well do you present your argument? And this comes into things like paragraph structures, writing structures, correct grammar. So if you are, a credit distinction type student, that's where you're kind of at. So at that level of grading, you've got your argument pretty good. So the next stage then becomes about improving your research quality, your referencing, and your writing stage. Because really with a HD paper, what we kind of say is that it's almost perfect, almost a publishing standard, with a couple of little errors forgiven. But if you've got quite a few writing issues with grammar, sentence structure, spelling mistakes, basic factual errors, then it can't be a HD. A HD paper is essentially, what we're saying is pretty close to perfect. So these are the things to focus on. Certainly the litmus test that I ask myself when I'm marking your work is, the first question is, has this person demonstrated on paper, in writing, that you know what you're talking about? If the answer is yes, then you pass. You have to pass. Because, and if the answer is no, that you don't know what you're talking about, you haven't demonstrated that you know what you're talking about, then that's not a pass. Okay, that's the minimum litmus test that I ask in my marking. The next question then becomes, well, how well do you pass? And that's based on things like how well you've made your argument, how well you've researched your evidence, how well you've written the whole thing. So they're kind of the two questions that I look for. Other than that, I think you're all doing really well. Certainly the first short essay that I marked, everyone did exceptionally well. I was so impressed. I've actually been talking with colleagues at Soul HQ about how well you've all been doing. So keep up the good work, but as always, we can improve on things. So if you do have any questions over the next few days, please feel free to shoot them through to me. Otherwise, I look forward to reading all those papers next week. Thanks very much.